This video is for The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street Freyag Pyramid. So in this assignment, on this very first page, you have an example of Freyag's pyramid. This is a physical depiction of plot structure. You can see how each element of plot fits into his pyramid. If you look here at the bottom left, you start with exposition. This is the very beginning of the story. And then it works its way up to rising action. And at the very peak, you have climax. And then it falls into falling action before it ends in the resolution. Now, this is important that you understand you are not writing on this particular page. You are not going to have enough room to record all of your information in these boxes. So you're not writing on this page, but you will start writing here. So exposition is the beginning of a narrative in which the reader meets several characters, including the protagonist. Now, for The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, we don't really have any particular protagonist. The closest would probably be Steve. So you're going to be focusing on all of the characters. In the exposition, we also have the setting, which is the time and place. And we also find out key background information about our characters. If you need quick access to the script, you can click here. This is for our virtual students. If you are a traditional student in class today, then Miss Robertson already gave you a paper copy of the script that you can use. So I've given you some guiding questions to answer in this space below. I'm going to take this out of present mode. If you are one of Miss Robertson's kids, you can click in this bottom box to begin typing. If you're one of my kids, then in Cami, you need to add a text box here. So some guiding questions. What is the setting? Who are the characters? And what key background information do we have about the neighbors? I'm going to go back to the script and look at the first page. The narrator tells us on the first page of the script that this takes place on Maple Street, USA, late summer. So I'm going to go back here to my Freyag's Pyramid, and I'm going to begin my answer. The setting is on Maple Street in the United States, and it takes place in late summer. Okay? Who are the characters? Now, this is very important that you understand. In the exposition, it's just the beginning of the story. We don't meet all of the characters in the beginning. We meet several of them, but not necessarily all of them. So if we go back here, we're just going to look at the first few pages. We've got the narrator, Steve, Dawn, Myra, who is Steve's wife. We're not going to count the woman in voice 1 and voice 2. We're just going to look at the names. We've got Pete Van Horn, Charlie, Tommy. So I want you to start listing the characters here. The characters in the exposition include Steve, Dawn, Charlie, and then I'll let you fill in the rest. Remember, you were only looking at the beginning of the book. What key background information is revealed about the neighbors? If we go back and focus again just on the beginning. Whoops. Went too far. The narrator tells us that this is a typical suburban neighborhood. People are washing their cars, talking to each other, eating ice cream, watering their lawn. So it seems like they have a very normal, friendly interaction with each other. And then all of a sudden the narrator says that there is a roar and a flash of light. And the roar and the flash of light, they believe it's a meteor, is what changes everything in this story. So they went from being this normal neighborhood to what's happening to them after the roar and the flash of the light. Well, it tells us that everything stopped working. Cars, lawnmowers, stoves, radios, phones, everything quit working in the beginning of the story. So in the beginning of the story, everything and everyone is normal. And then I want you to tell me what people are doing. People are talking to each other, mowing the lawn, washing cars. Suddenly, a roar and flash of light takes place, which causes what? So I want you to tell me what happens with the roar and the flash of the light. How does this, we're going to see how this affects their normal relationship. So the exposition, just give me some background information as to what's happening. Now, your rising action is considered the meat of the story because it includes the most important actions. It builds suspense, it creates interest in the reader. I want you to give particular attention to the neighbors' conflicts, their problems, because these lead the plot to the climactic moment. So you're going to list examples of rising action in this box here, and I want you to identify moments of suspense, their conflicts, their decisions, because all of these are going to lead to the climax. Because rising action is the majority of a text, you're going to list 10 things that you believe qualify as rising action. Your responses need to be in complete sentences, and you have 2 pages to record your information if you need the extra space. So you have this box for rising action, and you have this page for rising action. So let's look at it. Let's go back to this, the story. In the exposition, again, you have the roar and the flash of light. They attribute it to a meteor and everything turns off. And Pete Van Horn makes the decision that he is going to go across the street and find out if the other neighborhoods are experiencing the same power outage. He's gone for quite some time, and Charlie and Steve say that they are going to follow him and see what's happening. And all of a sudden you have this young boy, Tommy, who speaks up and warns them that they should not leave the neighborhood. This really confuses everybody. What is Tommy talking about? He says that he read in a comic book that aliens from another planet had infiltrated the neighborhood. They look just like everybody in the neighborhood. They look normal. A mother, a father, a son, and a daughter. And they don't want anyone to leave. Well, at first everybody thinks Tommy is just being so crazy and silly. He's just read too many comic books. But then his story starts to create suspicion and doubt in the neighbors. So I want you to start there. Tommy, a young neighborhood boy, warns, let's say, Steve and Charlie not to leave Maple Street because the aliens don't want them to go. So this is still number 1. Actually, I'm going to label this as number 1. People begin to look at each other with suspicion. Okay, so your first example of rising action, Tommy, a young neighborhood boy, warns Steve and Charlie not to leave Maple Street because the aliens don't want them to go. People begin to look at each other with suspicion. Let's also mention he claims the aliens have infiltrated the neighborhood and look like a typical family. Okay, So we have number 1. Tommy, a young neighborhood boy, warns Steve and Charlie not to leave Maple Street because the aliens don't want them to go. He claims the aliens have infiltrated the neighborhood and look like a typical family. People begin to look at each other with suspicion. So what you need to do next is list numbers 2 through 10. What else happens in the rising action? What are some things that are happening that's suspenseful, causing problems? What are their decisions? Remember, you've got space here in this text box and on the next page if you need it. The climax is the turning point in the story, and a lot of people get this wrong. Most people think it's just the most exciting part of the story. That's not all it is. The climax is so much more than that. Usually this is where the protagonist meets his or her biggest conflict head on, and it changes them. Now in this story, the climax greatly affects Charlie. He's not necessarily the protagonist, but he is directly involved in the climax. So using details and text evidence, I want you to identify the climax and prove why you believe this scene qualifies as the climax. So you've got your guiding questions that you're going to answer in this text box at the bottom of the page. What is the primary conflict in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street? What is the biggest problem? We know that they're experiencing this massive power outage. Nothing works. But is that the biggest problem? Or is it the fact that everyone is turning against each other? Nobody trusts one another anymore. How does Charlie attempt to solve this conflict? And how does this affect or change Charlie and the neighbors? So I want you to remember Pete Van Horn had left Maple Street to see if other neighborhoods were experiencing the same power outage. In the midst of everyone turning against each other and making blames, accusations, they see a figure approaching in the darkness. And Charlie, he's a little bit of a hothead. He takes a gun and tries to defend the neighborhood, defend himself. He allows his fear to take over. So what is the biggest conflict in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street? Is it the fact that it's a power outage, or is it the fact that everyone's turning against each other? How does Charlie attempt to solve the conflict? And then how does this change things for Charlie and the neighbors? Your falling action occurs immediately after the climax. It wraps up the loose ends of the narrative and it leads to the ending. The falling action is very quick because the climax is always towards the end of the story. So I want you to identify just 2 examples of falling action in the story. So Charlie has shot Pete Van Horn. What has happened after he has shot Pete Van Horn? And then your resolution. This occurs immediately following the falling action. The conflict is resolved. The narrative concludes. Using details, I want you to identify the narrative's resolution. What is the last thing that we see in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street? I'm actually going to take us down to that. So everyone has turned against each other. They are breaking into houses. They are physically attacking each other. And then in scene 2, we have 2 figures. Figures 1 and figure 2 are standing up on in a field up on a hill, and they're overlooking what's happening on Maple Street. What do we learn about these figures? Who are they? What do they tell us about their role in this entire scenario? What are they doing? What are they responsible for? Have they done this before? So you're going to tell me what the resolution is. When you are done, you are going to turn this in. If you have me, hit turn in on Cami. If you have Miss Robertson, close this tab and click the submit assignment on the assignment page.